All right, we're turning our attention to part C in the moon's subsection, which is on phases. And this set of 8 circles you can find on page 104 in the workbook. And the idea is, of course, to sketch a little bit on each and every one of them. So I'm not going to be nearly as neat as you might be, but I'm just going to be kind of crude with my filling in. On the first moon, go ahead and fill the entire thing in. So I'll take my black pen and simply do this. Yep, that's my rendition of filling in the entire thing. You can probably do a little bit better. But when you can't see the moon, it fades into the darkness of night. There's nothing to be seen. It is called a new moon. The ancients thought of the moon as being like a blossom or a fruit on a tree that would blossom every month and then decay and be gone again. So there's your new or your beginning moon of the cycle. On the next moon, give me a sliver on the right like this, but shade in the majority on the left. So just like this. Again, not being overly neat. But our eye is, of course, drawn to the shaded portion, and that's the part that actually disappears into the night sky. So that's the part you don't see. What you're seeing in this case is just a sliver of light on the right. When the moon is lit from the right-hand side like that, it's called a waxing moon. Waxing. And when it's less than half lit, we call that shape crescent. And thanks to Pillsbury, or maybe it's a Plato, we all know what that shape is called. You spell crescent, C-R-E-S-C-E-N-T, crescent. On the next moon, split it right down the middle in half. And shade the left-hand side, okay? Not sure I like how much that's shaded, but I can do a little bit better. But just like so here. And then we talk about the fact that the lit portion of this moon looks like a capital letter D. Yeah, the darkness again fades into the darkness of night. All we see is the right side being illuminated. This is called a quarter moon, even though you might say, oh, I thought it was called a half moon. Well, it's half of the half that you get to see, so technically it's a quarter, isn't it? And because it's the first one that you encountered in this cycle from new, it's the first quarter moon. Okay, to finish out the top row, give me a crescent on the left side. But what have we been doing on the top row? We've been shading the left sides, haven't we? So this time you shade the minority left, which leaves the majority lit and on the right-hand side. So every time the moon is lit from the right-hand side, it's referred to as a waxing moon. So this would be waxing. But anytime it's more than half lit, the name of that general phase is called gibbous. Have you heard that name before? Gibbous? Maybe so. Gibbous is hard to spell. It's G-I-B-B-O-U-S, gibbous. If you look at the etymological origins of gibbous, it either means hunchback or it means with child. And either one kind of gives you an impression of what you're looking at here in terms of a sort of a bulbous hump. On the next moon, leave it alone, no shading to be done. And when it's totally exposed, the half that you get to see all the time, we call that, of course, full. But that's very inconsistent. If that one was called quarter, you should be calling this one half, shouldn't you? Or likewise, if you call that one half, then you should be calling this full, but clearly it's not consistent. Now for the next 3 moons, the bottom row will be shading the right-hand sides of the moon. On the next one, give me the crescent on the right, but shade the minority right, like this. So now it qualifies as gibbous again because it's more than half lit. But when the left sides are lit on the moon, we call these waning or getting smaller moons because, well, they are. And waning is perhaps the hardest word for everybody to spell. It's W-A-N W-A-N-I-N-G. There's not an extra I in the middle of it. It's just W-A-N-I-N-G. If you were to put an extra N in the middle, you'd pronounce it differently. You wouldn't say waning, you'd say wanning, yes, or wanning if you're from my part of the country. But waning, yeah, just one N in the middle and an I-N-G. And gibbous, all right, it was hard to spell the first time, but not so much the second time. G-I-B-B-O-U-S. On the next moon, split it right down the middle again. But unlike right above it, we'll be shading the right-hand side on the bottom row. So definitely qualifying as a quarter moon again. And which number is it? Which numbered quarter is it? I see the first. We haven't seen the second yet, have we? But technically speaking, the full moon is the second quarter moon. Just two quarters put together to make the whole. I know, nobody ever calls it that, but technically the full moon is the second quarter. That makes this one the third, or just to be safe, call it the last quarter, you know. Forget about the numbers, just call it the last quarter moon. We know what you're talking about. And that leaves which one left over? Yeah, there's going to be another crescent moon, and this time it's going to be the diminishing one or the waning crescent. So where'd your sliver go this time? The crescent goes on the left-hand side, but it's the bottom row, so we're shading the right-hand side. So do that, shade the majority right. And again, even though your eye is tempted, you know, to look at the shaded side you just spent all that time on, that's the part that disappears into the darkness of night. So all we see is the sliver of light on the left-hand side. This is called the waning crescent. W-A-N-I-N-G, crescent. Yeah, croissant, right? C-R-E-S-C-E-N-T. How long does it take to cycle through all these phases? Well, you can say a month, that's fine. But the period P, the length of time to cycle through all these phases, is roughly 29 and a half days. Well, that's where the old classical period of month comes from. In ancient times, they didn't know of fractions. They didn't have, you know, half days. So they would say one month is 29 days, and the next one was 30. The next one was 29, the next one was 30. The next one was 20. You get the idea. And that kept it in sync with the lunar phases. You get one full moon every single month, like it was intended. But if you do that, you know, 29, 30, 29, 30, 29, 30, do 12 of those fit nicely into the solar year? No. So what did they do at a future date? They lengthened the months to make sure that 12 of them fit nicely into the calendar year. And then, of course, you know, the meaning of month kind of, you know, gets lost now, doesn't it? If you have a month with 31 days to it, it's possible to get a full moon on the 1st, get your second full moon on the 30th, you can get 2 full moons in a calendar month. And if that does occur, what do you call the second full moon of a calendar month? It's called the blue moon. Yeah. So if you've heard somebody my age say once in a blue moon, they're talking about a fairly rare event. Yeah, not a very common occurrence. Well, how many own a calendar at home that has the phases marked on it for you? Kind of like mine here. You can kind of see these shaded little circles here, right? Telling you when the phases are. Well, it usually shows you the new and the first quarter and the full and the last quarter. Always more fancy sort of months. Only 4 of these occur on one specific day, and they're literally at one specific moment of time. So I'm going to put red X's above the 4 that are that instantaneous phase. This one here, the new moon. This one here, the first quarter moon. The full moon and the last quarter moons all happen at a moment of time. A fancy calendar will tell you the exact minute of the day that the full moon occurs. If you ask most people on the street, you know, how long does a full moon last for, they would tell you, I don't know, 2 or 3 nights, because it does look very full for 2 or 3 nights in a row. I agree. But to be completely lit like that perfectly is actually a moment of time. So on one specific day, at one specific moment, you get your full moon. And then a few minutes later, guess what? It's already a waning gibbous, technically speaking. So what do the red X's mean? The red X's imply instantaneous phases. And with a chance of, you saying it one moment in the month. There's only 4 moments in the month that would be these specific phases. And the answer is, it's a pretty rare occurrence to actually nail it on the nose. So for the rest of the month, guess what the moon is? It's one of the 4 remaining phases, which are long-lasting. The green check mark moons, this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, are all week-long phases. Everything in between a new moon and a first quarter moon is called a waxing crescent. So there's many different degrees of waxing crescentness. Some are very, very thin. Some are quite large, almost the size of a first quarter. But everything in between these 2 moments is called waxing crescent. Likewise, everything between a first quarter and a full moon is called a waxing gibbous. So the smallest waxing gibbous is barely bigger than a first quarter moon. And the biggest waxing gibbous is just a hair less than a full moon. But everything in between is called a waxing gibbous. And you get the idea, the same with a waning gibbous and a waning crescent. So what do the green check marks imply? Each of those are week-long phases. They're just great catch-alls for, everything in between the momentary or the instantaneous phases. So, we probably have known of these names and probably these, shaded proportions before, but really getting into the nitty-gritty about, how they're caused and how they can be predicted, well, that's what's coming next.